Welcome to the Uplift Chronicles, where we journey through the powerful stories of those who inspire, uplift, and make a difference. I am your host, Kofi Dake. In each episode, we dive deep into the lives, accomplishments, and the diverse backgrounds of remarkable individuals, particularly those of Afro heritage, who are changing the world one story at a time. Whether you are seeking motivation, connection, or a celebration of culture, you are definitely in the right place. So sit back and relax, and let's explore how lives are being uplifted both in Africa and across the globe. This is the Uplift Chronicles. Today, my guest is Mr. Melvin. Foote has worked on African issues for more than 40 years. He is well known across Africa and is highly respected by opinion makers and decision makers in Washington, D.C. for his work with Africa over many decades. He has worked or met many prominent African leaders, including former President Nelson Mandela. He has also worked in many African countries, such as Eritrea, Ethiopia, and then Senegal, and many more others. I had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Foote actually at an African League or President Summit in Washington, D.C. As a young gentleman at that time and starting out my career, he was graceful enough to share his contact with me. Very humble man, and I've kept in touch over the years. And despite his busy schedule, he has found time to respond to my messages. For that, Mr. Foote, I say thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And you? Yes, you're welcome. We'll focus with a lot of time that we have on changing narratives of Africa, and then also your uplifting stories. So people have looked at Africa as a dark continent over many years. What has been your experiences with working with many Africans and Black people, for that matter, both in Africa and the USA? Has the narrative or perception of Africa changed over time, or do you think it's still the same?
Well, I'll be truthful. I started out as a Peace Corps volunteer. I went to college out in Colorado. I'm from Illinois originally, and I went to college up in the mountains of Colorado. And mostly white people, and I went there because I had a basketball scholarship. I said I wanted to see something else. So I got to Colorado, and this was the time of the civil rights struggle here in the United States. And so my senior year, I started a column in the newspaper called The Back of the Bus. So every week I wrote about Black people, to educate my college classmates about African Americans. So a guy wrote me a note and said he wanted to see me. And so we met in the student union. He was a white guy from Michigan. He had just come out of the Peace Corps in Ghana. And he fell in love with his counterpart, who was Ghanaian. And he wanted my opinion about interracial marriage because his family was going to disown him and that kind of thing. Well, I can't tell you about, love, or I don't know anything about that. But what is the Peace Corps? So he told me about the Peace Corps, and my light bulb went off. I said, oh, I would like to go to Africa, but I didn't know anything about Africa, And like most Americans back then, all we knew about was Idi Amin, famine, Biafra. We didn't know anything about Africa. There was no Google back then. You could not Google and say, let me learn something about Africa. So I went to the library, and so I put in my application. And I didn't hear anything for 6 months. So finally, I got a letter from the Peace Corps that said, you've been accepted, and you're going to go to Ethiopia. I didn't know where Ethiopia was at. I thought it was in the Middle East, because if you look at the Bible, you see Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Ethiopia. And so I said, wow, I don't want to go to the Middle East. So I went to the library, found an atlas, and saw a map of Africa with Ethiopia right in the heart of Africa. I said, wow, I'm going to go to Africa. So I went home and told my father I'm going to Africa because I was the first one in my family to graduate from college. Okay. And he said, you're going to get eaten by a lion. Well, I didn't know the difference. I thought, there was a TV program called Tarzan every week you saw Tarzan with this white man who would go through the jungles of Africa. He could talk to the animals. He ride on the vines. I thought, honestly, I thought Tarzan would be at the airport to meet us with a herd of elephants. I had no knowledge whatsoever about Africa, and most Americans didn't have any knowledge about Africa. So I spent 3 years at Eritrea and then Ethiopia, and I learned a lot.
That was in 1973 to 76. You were in
73 to 76. I was Peace Corps.
Peace Corps,
Peace Corps, and I was in Eritrea for the first year. The war broke out. Peace Corps didn't even tell me I was in a war zone. And so I got evacuated, and they put me in the eastern part of Ethiopia. But that was my first experience in Africa, and I've since been involved with Africa ever since. So now we're talking 50 years that I've been to. I've been to more than 45 countries on the continent. I speak several languages, and I lived 7 years in Africa. And so when you think about an African American, think about me. I'm an American, sure, but I lived in Africa, and I venture to say I know more about Africa than most Africans because I've been to a lot more places than most Africans. That's my story.
I can believe that. Yes, yeah. So now I know you did spend some. You've mentioned the multiple African countries you've been. I know Somalia was one of them in 1984, but also 32 years later, you founded the nonprofit organization which advocates for Africa in the United States throughout the diaspora called Constituency for Africa, CFA. So was that your first run in Africa, in Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Somalia? Was that when it inspired you to found this nonprofit?
No, actually, I was with an organization called Afro-Care. It no longer exists, but it was an organization founded by African Americans to help Africa. And they build water wells, health clinics, rural development was their focus. It was a great organization. So Afro-Care recruited me to be their country director in Somalia. And I went to Mogadishu for 3 years with Afro-Care. I became really good at telling the story about my projects. I would write my reports. I would put pictures in my reports. And so Afro-Care came up with the idea of a program to educate Americans about Africa and asked me to come back after 3 years to head up this program. We called it development education. And then out of that, I formed a network among the Black organizations that work on Africa. There were many Black organizations working on Africa, but they did not work together. They were like tribes. They were like Ga and Ashanti. And, if you're in my tribe, I work with you. But I wanted to break that down. I said we should be working with each other, and we should be working for the betterment of Africa. So I formed this network in 1990 to really educate, to bring all these groups together. And in 1994, it became an independent organization from Afro-Care with the mission to educate the public about Africa, to improve cooperation and coordination among the organizations that are working on African issues, and to help shape U.S. policy toward Africa. That was the first and foremost effort to work together so the diaspora could have some impact on U.S. policy toward Africa. So that was the basis, the beginning of the Constituency for Africa.
Okay, and then through the years, you've worked on another impressive stuff that I read about you, and I think we spoke briefly through chats, was you worked with the Obama administration to spearhead the investment in future African leaders rather than the present or the present presence, the older folks. So how did you come about this idea, and how easy was it or difficult was it to advise the Obama administration to actually invest in leadership programs such as the Mandela Fellowship and the YALI?
Well, the mission of CFA is to shape U.S. policy toward Africa. Prior to that, other organizations that worked on various policies, Trans-Africa focused on the anti-apartheid movement that resulted in Nelson Mandela becoming free. But I came up with the strategy of working with the U.S. Congress, the Congressional Black Caucus. And so part of that, what I found was, even though they're members of Congress, they're not gods. They don't know everything. And so what I found was I was able to give them ideals. I would give them program suggestions. Remember, the Congress, the main priorities of a member of Congress is to get reelected. And so that what they want to do is be popular. So I started to work with Congress back then, and I came up with an idea. When Obama became president, he sent one of his envoys to see me. He said, and the guy said, President Obama wanted you to know, when Obama came to power, remember back then the U.S. economy had crashed. The Republicans had crashed the economy. They had made sure that Obama, the first black man to be president of the United States, didn't have any money to do anything. And Obama followed really the best president ever to work on Africa, and that was George W. Bush. And Bush was a Republican, and but he gave $15 billion for PEPFAR, or $19 billion for PEPFAR, $5 billion for the Millennium Challenge account. He had Colin Powell, Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, National Security Advisor, Jendai Frazier, another African-American, as Assistant Secretary for Africa. So quite frankly, here come Obama. Welcome to the White House, Mr. Black Man, and you have no money. So Obama sent his envoy to me and said, what can I do? Because I did a lot of work with Bush on PEPFAR. We were also at the forefront of getting the presidential emergency response to HIV/AIDS in Africa. PEPFAR, that was also an initiative that we spurred. So I wrote a paper. I thought about it for about a week and wrote a paper to President Obama about what he could do, because he said, I don't have a lot of money my first year or two, but I want Africans to know that the brother cares about Africa. So I wrote a paper. I said, okay, one thing you could do is don't spend your time chasing Mugabe and Biya and Bashir and Museveni and all these old guys. They're not going to change. Work on the young ones coming up, the next generation of leadership. And that was the concept really behind Yali. Obama embraced it. He was a young president himself. And so the ideal of reaching to the next generation appealed to him. And so he accepted. I also told him to do a White House conference on Africa. And, I said, that don't cost a lot of money. And we were talking about getting 4 or 5 presidents to sort of be the leader. We were going to get the president of Botswana. We're going to get Jerry Rawlings. We came up with 4 or 5 that were going to lead it. But that became the U.S.-Africa Summit that you witnessed. And it was going to be held his first term, but we had the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. And so it got delayed to the second term, and it got shifted from, I was thinking more general, but it got shifted to be trade. But nevertheless, that became the White House Conference on Africa. I was thinking it was going to be in the White House. I didn't see it as being this huge event with, scores of African leaders, but it expanded. As the process went out, it became an expanded process, and it focused around U.S. trade with Africa. So I was happy about that. And I told him also to work on the diaspora, to set up an office in the diaspora, to set up an office in the White House to engage the diaspora. And he liked that idea too, but he gave it to Hillary Clinton, who was the Secretary of State, to implement it. And what she did was anybody who got a diaspora, Sri Lanka, India, Guatemala, all the diaspora were put in one basket along with Ghana, Nigeria, whatever. So nothing came out of it. It was not focused, so nothing came out of it. So I gave it to the president.
Not to cut you on that, but it was more collective and not centralized. So there was nothing focused on Africa. So that's when nothing came out of that. How do you deal with the diaspora? Everybody came from somewhere. Even the white people came from Sweden or Britain or France. Everybody came from somewhere. So we all are immigrants, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
You call me a slave if you want to, but I'm an immigrant. So it didn't have any focus, so it didn't go anywhere with Hillary.
With that, So you mentioned something which was interesting, and I want to go back to that. President Bush did a lot of initiatives to help out Africa. Okay, and ironically, when he left office, there was no money left for Obama, but Do you think Obama still inherited that trust that Africans had to say that President Bush was in Africa helping out? So that kind of paved the way for the Obama administration.
Well, the Africans, quite frankly, Africans by and large became looking for aid. Africans got addicted to aid. They're still addicted to aid. They're still looking for this money coming so they can put it in their pocket, really.
Right.
So here come Obama. When the Republicans lost the election and Obama won the election, they did everything possible to wreck the economy. And so the banks crashed, several banks crashed. General Motors was on the verge of crashing.
Yeah.
People were being thrown out of jobs. They wanted Obama to look as bad as possible. You look at the politics today and you see what people do. If the Republicans lose the election in November, trust me, they're going to do all they can to make the economy bad. They're going to do all they can to make the life hard for the Democrats. Now, as opposed to saying, okay, once we have an election, we should all come together and do the best for America. It's going to be one versus the other. So when Obama became president, the ideal of a black man being president of the United States was something that was, even to this day, there's many white Americans who would never accept that. They never accepted Obama being the president of the United States. All of these MAGA people that we hear about, you think they were happy with Obama president of the United States? No. And so they did everything possible to try to derail the administration and make life as miserable as possible so that 4 years from now, please come back, Republicans. Please come back. So it's a bad case. But Obama inherited a bankrupt government, basically. And so it wasn't that Bush did it. Bush did what he was supposed to do. And Obama really wanted to build on top of what Bush did. But he couldn't because he didn't have the budget. He had to put Americans back to work. He had to get some of these banks going again. He had to get the Lehman Brothers going again. He had to get the country moving back in a positive direction. So he said that was going to take him at least 2 years.
Yes.
And so the Africans were saying, come on, brother. We expected a brother to come give us. We saw what Bush did. We want you to give us more than what Bush did. Well, it don't work like that. You only got what you got to work with. And Obama wanted to demonstrate that he's very interested in Africa, but he didn't have the money that Bush had, to commit to projects in Africa.
Definitely it was a great idea for the Obama administration to reach out to seasoned guys, gentlemen like you have the vast experience working in Africa. But also just to touch on this thing. So Africa mostly has been categorized still like in the colonial days where thereby overlooking the economic and technological growth that has transpired over the years. And also you did mention that, some of the African leaders, yes, they're always asking for arms or asking for, money. And some of those money is never accounted for because they go into the wrong hands or the wrong pockets. So how do we change this narrative about Africa and encourage investors from the diaspora who share the interest of Africans?
Well, I think, honestly, that we're talking about a 100-year strategy. And I say a 100-year strategy was that the reason Africa is fragmented the way it is with all these little small countries is because the European colonizers wanted it that way. They wanted to make sure that these Africans can't speak to these Africans because they speak French and they speak Portuguese or they speak English. And this is your border. So you need an army. You need a U.S. embassy. You need embassies all around the world. You need all of these things, the trappings of governments. Well, most of these countries in Africa are not countries. They're not countries. Some of them were based on ethnic lines. And so by dividing Africa up, it makes it almost impossible for the country to go forward. Now, keep in mind, Africa is one of the wealthiest continents in the world. Gold, diamond, oil, magnesium, lithium, name it, Africa got it. And what the rest of the world wants are those minerals. And so the best way to get those minerals is to divide the people up, fragment them, corrupt them, pay some of them a little money in a Swiss bank account, so you can get the diamonds, you can get the oil. Africa finds itself in that place today. Now, I think in order for it to change, Africa, Kwame Nkrumah had it correct. Africa must unite if Africa is to move forward. And what we found was the African leaders who really tried to unite the continent, either they assassinated them, or they corrupted them, or they messed up Sankara and Burkina Faso. They didn't want Africa to be united. They didn't want Africa to be educated, and they didn't want Africa to be transparent and democratic. They wanted Africa to be fragmented because it helps them to get those natural resources. They could just come and pay you a little money and get your natural resources. So that's where we are today. So I think the future of Africa is going to be the people like yourself, the young people, the Yali type. I'm proud of Yali. I must have met 10,000 of them since the inception of the program. I haven't met one yet that I was not impressed with. I haven't met one. Yes. And so now they're also meeting each other. The Kenyan is meeting the Ghanaian. The South African is meeting the Ethiopian. The Senegalese is meeting the Zimbabwean. And so, with digital technology, they're communicating, they become friends. I'm convinced that the future is in the hands of the next generation of Africans, and they must link up with the African diaspora over here, the young people. I've been trying to link up the Yali with the African Americans and other African from over here, the young ones. They're dynamic ones over here too. And you guys need to meet each other. But I tell you, they've been keeping them. They want the Africans talking to Mzungu, and they want the African Americans not to know about Africa. So my challenge is continuing to bridge the gap, educate about Africa, build partnerships and linkages. That really is the mission of CFA. That's what I try to do every day.
And yes, you hit the nail right in the head, because I had the opportunity to attend to one of the Yali events in I've been to a couple of them, but most recently there was one at University of Delaware that they had a dinner, and not only did they have a dinner, but they had presentations which were very awesome, and it's so impressive to see how the young generation in Africa are actually stepping up, doing things in technology, in medicine, in business, what have you. Because we had the young doctors and educationists and different spheres of the world coming together. It was so impressive, and I had the privilege to be over there as well. So that's good stuff. Now, talking about what you did mention about the different divisions that were imposed on Africa, do you think that, looking at, for instance, what's happening in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, where the natives have actually decided to take things into their hands and kind of pave the course for their country in a positive direction, because they're pretty much saying that over the years that France and the West have been over there, they've taken all the resources from their land, but the people still are living in impoverished conditions. Do you think you're going to see a lot of those kind of uprising in Africa, as we're seeing across the globe? Mostly, I think Kenya, the youth, and in Nigeria have also risen up, the Gen Z, to demonstrate and protest against bad government and corruption.
Well, I think we have to be careful still. It's not like the African, caucusing, coming up with ideals and say we want to change. You also got Russians in play here. You also got Chinese across Africa in play. You got Turkey, you got Dubai, you got all of these Arab countries. Everybody got their hands on Africa. Trust me on that. And so when you say that Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are, waking up and saying we want to have a new, is it the people of Niger and Burkina Faso and Mali, or are they the Russians saying, okay, let's kick the French out so we can replace the French? So you replace one white man with another white man, I wonder about these things. And I do know that everybody wants the natural resources of Africa, and they're going to do everything possible. If they get Africans fighting Africans, they win. You buy weapons from here, and then you go sell weapons to the other side. Ukraine has been a weapons factory for Africa, and they will sell weapons to both sides of the conflict.
Right.
They're not they're not interested in your having a peace process. They want you to fight so that you buy their weapons. Yes.
So, another question I have for you is with the ECOWAS or African Union. I know you had the privilege to. I think you also founded the African American Unity Caucus, AAUC, right? So, through its work, right, in Africa, what was the challenges you faced working with the African Union?
Well, the African Union is a interesting entity. In theory, it makes a lot of sense. And your president, Kwame Nkrumah, of course, started this ideal of a continental government. But Africa itself has fought the ideal of success for the African Union. They don't want to pay their dues. They fight over politics. Museveni said he don't want his army in Addis Ababa. He wants his army in Kampala. In other words, you got the guy who. If I'm a president of a little small country, let's say Burundi, or let's say Equatorial Guinea, I don't want Africa unity. I am the president of my kingdom. I got the money. I control it. And so I'm not going to be for a unified Africa. This is something that African people are going to have to deal with one way or another. And the rest of the world, say what you want to say, that the rest of the world, including the United States, is not in their best interest for Africa to unite and Africa to take care of Africa and Africa to deal with the rest of the world. I'm really excited about the Continental African Free Trade Area. Wamkele Mena, who is the head of it, is a friend of mine, and I'm encouraged by it. He's trying to get all the country to form a market, an Africa market. But I guarantee you, before they get to success, you're going to have all kinds of destabilization from the World Bank, from the IMF, from some of these big governments, because they don't want Africa to feel united and deal with the rest of the world. You want our oil? This is what you got to do for all of Africa. They don't want that kind of conversation. And so I think that your generation, the next generation, and the generation following you, you got your work cut out for you.
Okay. Yes. So, what would be the most significant change that you see between this generation coming up? And I think you are very confident that we're going to make that change. But what is the contrast between the older generation and the newer generation that you can speak of?
Well, going back to Yali, in 2017, I went to the Yali organizer, IREX, and I said, why don't we bring 100 from Yali at the end of the year and 100 from the diaspora together for a conference? We organized it here in Washington, and it was great. It was a great thing. Dynamic young African Americans meeting dynamic young Kenyans and Ghanaians and Zambians. It was great. So the next year I go back to them and say, look, why don't we do 200 this year? Oh, we don't have money. And even though I, the person who gave the idea to Obama, the first year they flew me around West Africa, the State Department, to talk about this. Second year they had me standing up at a big meeting they had here in Washington. The third year they don't know my name. And now they don't want to give me credit for it. Now they want to say, oh, Obama came up with this while he was sitting on the toilet or something. Come on.
I'm glad I had you on this podcast so that our audience can know exactly who brought up that idea and what it is. I know that you worked with a lot of people, but I believe credit should be given where it's due.
Well, for me, I'm not actually looking for credit. If I go in my closet, you would be surprised how many awards I've gotten. Some of them I don't even remember. Yes. I got so many. For me, it's not about recognition for me. I just really want Africa to unite and Africa to go forward. That's all I want. I don't claim to be the smartest person in Africa or working on Africa, but I do have access to the smart people. I'm
Right.
not the most politically astute person working on Africa, but I do have access to the political. And my job is one of connecting, facilitating, coordinating, and pushing, But in order to do that, the problems that I encountered before my arrival was that all the blacks who were working on Africa wanted to be chief. Everybody wanted to be the leader.
The leader.
And so that meant that we're going to fight each other, even though we're doing totally different things. You're working on rural development, somebody else is working on apartheid.
Right.
So rather than work together, you're competing with each other. You're talking about them. You're undermining them. And that plays right into the hands of those who don't want Africa to survive. So I've taken a different approach where I just really try to bring Africans together to work together and to work in the interest of Africa and African people, and not just Africans on the ground in Africa. This also affects us here in the diaspora. If you look at the quality of life of African Americans in this country, it goes back to hundreds of years to the founding of this country when we were slaves. We still have health disparities. We still have education disparities. We still have job disparities. African Americans are in dire strait even in this country. And so when we talk about lifting Africa up, we got to really be talking about the Africa world, Africans on the ground in Africa, and Africans throughout the diaspora.
And throughout the diaspora, yes, absolutely. So now, with the Yali and the Mandela Fellowship, a lot of great strides have been made in those in those initiatives. So, just listening to you, I believe there might be some people who are against those initiatives because they're actually building the new brand of African leaders that will change a lot of things in Africa. We've already started seeing the changes that these people and our generation is making in Africa. So where do you see the future for this? Do you see funding drastically cut and the program just trying to be run down, or do you see a bright future for the program?
I see a bright future for the program. When Yali first got started, the biggest critics were African leaders. And their criticism was, why are you appointing the future African leaders? And the U.S. government, one of the things they did very well was they got the U.S. embassies in Africa to be the point of recruitment and coordination. In other words, the U.S. embassy makes the selection of the Yali who are coming from that country. It's not the African leaders who are making the selection. But if you ask Paul Biya to send you 10 people for Yali, who is he going to send? He's going to send his nephew, his cousin, his friend, True. If you ask any one of these African leaders to send you the 10 people who should come for Yali, they're going to pick their 10, right? Their kids. But if you look at the Yali, you got a diversity, half and half women, men, you got Muslim, Christian, you got handicapped, you got blind, you got gay and lesbian. You have a tremendous cross-section of African leaders who were selected from the U.S. embassies. I give them an A+ in terms of the selection process.
Yes.
And I worked with, I was in Mali during the time of when the Yali delegation was organized. So I was there for the launching of the Mali Yali contingent with the ambassador there in Bamako. And man, it was fantastic to look at them. So I give the U.S. government A+ in terms of how they manage the process. And so I think going forward, it's something that both Republicans and Democrats both agree on, because the Yali alumni who have come through this program have demonstrated themselves well. When they see them on these campuses, they're amazed at the level of intelligence and dedication and all of that. And then when they see the follow-up on the Yali, what happened to those who go through the process? The young lady in Botswana is the Minister of Trade now. You're going to have presidents of countries who are going to be Yali alumni. Yeah, you're going to have.
I do agree. I do agree
you're going to have ministers of finance who are Yali alumni. And they're going to come with a whole different attitude about governance.
Yes.
They're going to come not to like, let me buy myself a new watch. Let me buy a new car. Let me buy some new dresses. They're going to come different. And I think they're going to have a profound impact on the future of Africa. I'm gung ho Yali. Yeah, gung ho.
Yes. I do totally agree with you. And most of the Yali and Mandela Fellowship candidates who have come, they've gone back home to actually make an impact. I'm also in contact with.
And another thing about the Yali program is a real small budget item. It's not like this cost the U.S. government a whole lot of money. But think about the friendships that we're making through Yali, who see the United States as a friend.
Yes.
You know, and if I'm the Minister of Trade now in Botswana, and I think about, wow, I could send a delegation to the United States to do trade, I'm going to do it, you know?
Yes.
And so I think for our own strategic interests, Yali makes a lot of sense for the United States. It should be expanded even to, it should be expanded in many kind of ways, mainly getting the Yali delegates to meet African Americans and those of us from the diaspora. And I'm going to continue to press for that.
Yes, well, I appreciate it, Sir. I appreciate it. So going back to Rwanda, Ethiopia, and Eritrea, I know you were part of the White House delegation to assess the impact of the genocide in Rwanda. Okay, you also served as a high-profile delegate of former U.S. Peace Corps volunteers in Ethiopia and Eritrea, I think in 2010, seeking an end to the war. How has this experience changed your life? On a high level, what recommendations were put to avoid such occurrences in Africa?
Well, the Rwanda genocide was to get a delegation to go to assess the situation in Rwanda was my ideal. I went through the White House. I met with the National Security Advisor for Africa, and I proposed to him. Keep in mind that Bill Clinton was the president then, and Bill Clinton ignored the genocide in Rwanda, and 1 million people were murdered in Rwanda, and we put a blind eye to it. We didn't respond to it at all. So the Clinton administration wasn't, they wanted something to show that we care. And so when I proposed the trip, they grabbed it and said yes, and they got us an airplane. There was, I think, 4 or 5 members of the Congress. And 40 of us who went to Rwanda to make an assessment. Now, it was the most shocking thing that I've ever encountered in my life. You think that you've seen it all, but to land in Kigali during the middle of the genocide, going to some of the camps and all that, it was absolutely horrific. Now, I went back to Rwanda several times, or 2 or 3 times since then. I went back, I think 2 years ago, for a mission around cancer and non-communicable diseases. So you can, when you go to Rwanda, you got an American passport, you can get your visa at the airport in Kigali. And so I opted for that. So I get there, and the officer who was registering me, he said, "Well, have you been to our wonderful country before?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Oh, when?" I said, "1994. And he fell back, because that was in the middle of the genocide. He couldn't believe. But if you go to Rwanda today, it's the most transformed country in Africa. I mean, say what you want to say about Kagame. He stayed too long, and I believe he has stayed too long. But he has done an absolutely remarkable job of turning the Rwanda completely upside down and getting it going again as a country. And I think, I've been across Africa. I can't think of any country in Africa where it's been transformed more than Rwanda. So what I found is, again, you can have impact on policy toward Africa by engaging with policymakers, by being strategic. And I learned how to do that. I learned how to do it on the fly. It's not like I studied it. I learned how to impact a member of Congress. I do everything in the lobby. Well, you got to impact the policy. And one, you do it by, I help member the Congressional Black Caucus organize the Foreign Affairs Brain Trust, which they have to oversee. I fill the room up for them. I give them things to do. If African leaders come into Washington and I have access to them, I'll invite a member of Congress to go with me. Wow, they get pictures and all that kind of thing. You become their friend. And I'm seen by members of Congress as their friend. Because I'm not nobody voted for me. I'm not a member of Congress, so I'm not running for anything. But they are. And if I help them to look good on foreign affairs, then again, they look at you as promising. So you take that and you move it along. Sometimes you give them a proposal, something you know you need to get done. You give them the proposal to lead it, you know, and they say, oh, okay. And you tell them what to do. Now, they're the ones who are standing before the camera and announcing the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act or announcing some initiative. So what you find out is that you figure out a way to be helpful to them and trusted among them. They call me. I don't have to call them. Their staff will call me. Say, what do you think about this? Can you come over and see Congressman so-and-so? He wants to meet with you. And so I become an ally. I'm somewhat of a lobbyist. That's what lobbyists get paid to do. I'm not a registered lobbyist, but I do the same things that lobbyists do. And I give them documents. I make them look good. I make them influential on Africa policy. And, that has enabled me to have access. The same thing with members of Congress. I gave Obama his strategy for Africa, basically. I gave the strategy to Kamala Harris, the vice president. When Joe Biden became a president, we wrote the concept. We delivered it to Kamala through her director for Africa, Jessica Davis-Ba, who is now the U.S. ambassador to Cote d'Ivoire. She's my good friend. And I introduced her to her husband. They met in my office. And so I'm a very good friend. They got 5 sons now, and they're. So anyway, we wrote the concept and told Biden, this is what you ought to do on Africa: A, B, C, D, and E.
Yes.
And
it's like you have the templates. You have the templates in place, and it would be nice if they follow your guidance on most of this time. The politicians who come into.
But you also got to know how to pitch it. You know, you don't necessarily have to pitch it to the president. In this case, we pitched it to the vice president, Kamala Harris, and knowing that she's going to take it there. You know, so you got to know how the power works. And once you figure some of that, a lot of it is learned. You know, you learn it. It's not like somebody could tell you how to do it. You got to learn how to do it. And I did a lot of
very interesting, because I was trying to wrap up my head on. I saw you worked with Senator Chris Cohn of Delaware, and I was recently at a summit they organized in Delaware, and they pitched some great investments in Africa, actually. So is there any link between you? I know you've worked with him. Is there any link in terms of Africa that you've worked with Senator Cohn? And I think
I work with him on a number of things. I think if Kamala Harris becomes the president, I think Senator Cohn will become the Secretary of State. So you heard it from me first. He'll be the Secretary of State, and he's a good guy. I've attended his conference up in Delaware several times. I went with Julius Garvey, is the son of Marcus Garvey, the great Pan-Africanist. Julius Garvey is one of my best friends. So we go over to see Senator Coons to talk about exonerating Marcus Garvey, who was, criminally indicted. And for the record, the Garvey family want to exonerate him. And so we went and had a meeting with Senator Coons on that. I find him very balanced. He's very smart. He's forward-thinking, and you could definitely impact him. You could push him to do things. He's not going to do it. You got to be solid with your thinking, and you got to have a good strategy. But I find him a very fair person to work with.
Yeah, I did see a picture of you and Dr. Julius Garvey, by the way. So that's nice. All right. So this question has been on my mind, right? Because so how do you handle criticism in our contemporary and pluralistic society? A society that is made up of different social classes, culture, race, and religion, especially when it comes to efforts to push policies that will improve the lives of Africans and Black people, or Afro-heritage oriented groups of people in government, businesses, technology in Africa. Because what triggered this question for me was I remember during the COVID-19 pandemic, there were a lot of talks on whether to limit vaccines going to Africa or just trying to ration how much of the vaccines has to be given to Africans.
Well, the United States, honestly, you got to go back to how this country was structured. It was, we committed genocide against the American Indians. The people who were living here were erased. They were actually killed. They were either killed or they were put in reservations where they are today. You don't even hear about the American Indian in this country. Okay, the second thing they did was they had to have people to clear the land, to do the work. And, because they said, okay, who do we get? That's where they came up with the idea of bringing Africans over here as slaves. And my ancestors, I'm 40% Ivorian, 20% Ghanaian, and 10% Nigeria. That's my DNA, And you find most Black Americans, I got friends in Charleston, South Carolina, which is the rice producing area. They went to Sierra Leone, Benin, and other rice producing countries to bring the people from there so they could work as slaves in the rice field. And so you look at how this country was formed, and you look at the history of this country, what they want to deny. They don't want to educate Americans about Africa. They don't want to talk about slavery. They don't want to talk about the massacre of the Indians. And so they want an American fairy tale that where white people were, the pioneers, the white people did this, and the white people came up with that. And then we have been basically written out of the history book. That's what they really want to happen. And so nothing has changed there. And so when you think about this country going forward in places like Africa, if you don't have an advocacy behind it, we're going to do the wrong thing. We're going to go to Africa for the wrong reason. We're definitely not there to help the people. So when the COVID-19 came, all said, "Oh, no African come." Then they start talking about banning Muslims, from the United States, and they started doing all these silly kind of things. That their racist tendencies drove them to do it and continue to drive them to do it. So these same people who committed the genocide and the same people who organized the slavery are with us today. These are their ancestors, And so I think that in order for us to improve ourselves, Black people, and that means Africans of all descent, must unite. Africa must unite with its diaspora. If you want to get the United States to work for Africa in a positive way, it seems to me that Africa ought to say, people like myself, they ought to say, Mr. Foote, here's a check for $5 million so that you can really do your jobs. They give the money to these white lobby firms on K Street, and what do they get for it? And I could tell you country after country after country hire one of these lobbyists and thinking that they're going to get access to the U.S. government, and they get nothing, and millions of dollars are wasted that way. But when it comes to supporting your own diaspora that's working to power Africa, Africans like, oh, we don't have any money. Get your money from Coca-Cola or Chevron. It's a real problem because we just simply don't understand what we need to do to survive in the world today. And I say that in all candor. The Nelson Mandelas of the world are gone, and we got to get leadership right in Africa that can make intelligent decisions in the interest of Africa. But Africans, by and large, many Africans hold us, African Americans, and you guys were slaves. Some kind of way you are inferior to us because I'm Igbo, or I'm Ashanti, or I'm Ga. We got to get past all of this stuff.
Yes, because, we definitely have to get past all that.
Because the rest of the world, they play us against each other. They make sure Africans don't meet African Americans and form businesses and form real relationships. They don't want us to do this. They don't want us to be having even this kind of conversation. Don't be surprised if you have a problem after this airs.
So that being said, obviously, we as Africans, African Americans, we all have a lot of work to do among ourselves to put that a common front out front. But Mr. Foote, so I am very obviously biased when it comes to African in the sense that I feel the media needs to do more on reporting positive things about Africa. Okay, so we have seen some growth in the economy and technology in many African markets, right? For instance, like Kenya is a huge hub for technology. And then also, according to the World Bank, about over 160 million Africans now have access to broadband internet. This is just from between 2019 and 2022. But also, about 191 million Africans actually made some sort of monetary, digital money payment transactions, either receiving money or sending out money, according to the World Bank. Do you foresee the African market to be one of the greatest and fast-growing economy now or in the future? And how do you perceive the media should report on Africa in this century?
Well, a couple of things on the media. The Black media in America has been decimated over the last 20 years. There's publications like Jet magazine, you may not have heard of, but Jet was something every Black American read. You read it.
Yeah, I heard about. I never said it.
Okay, they're out of business now. You know,
okay.
American magazine, which was our equivalent of Time magazine, would tell stories about what's going on in Africa. You know, they're out of business, and so part of this was the advertisement dried up, and you know, you understand that somebody said, "Oh, let's stop these people from being able to tell this story," and so part of the problem is again, you know, we're being pressed over here. So we're not able to help Africa the way we should be able to help Africa. There's a number of Black media organizations, one, the National Association of Black Journalists, that just had their meeting in Chicago. You got the National Newspaper Publishers Association, which is a network of some 200 Black papers. You got all kinds of networks that want to work on Africa, but they don't have the capacity or the resources to do it. It seems to me that with technology being what it is, we should be doing all kinds of things now with digital platforms to be able to communicate the stories better and to share this stuff. But there are people here who don't want Africa's image to be improved. You know, there are people here who don't want, they think that if they can make Africa bad and all kinds of problems, then it might come a point when we can even eliminate Africa. For sure, if another COVID pandemic or major pandemic spreads across Africa, you're going to have some people who don't want to intercede. Let the people die. And so if the people die in Africa, then they can go unfeathered to get the diamonds, the oil, the gas, and so forth. So there are people who don't want Africa to be strong. There are people who don't want Africa to be united. And it's up to us to understand that, you know, this has been a battle for several hundred years. If you want to talk to Dr. Garvey, he can give you an expose on that. But
yes. I would love to have him on this program. Yes,
I can set it up for you. But we have got to educate ourselves and build the necessary linkages among ourselves. Nobody's going to do it for us, and there are people out there who don't want this to happen. And so some of them are funded. Some of them are funded to make sure that we don't connect. They'll do everything possible to undermine anything that looks like unity among African people.
Yeah, so it means there is a lot of work for us to be doing. So just going back to touch on what you did mention about China's presence in Africa and versus the U.S. and how the West might be seen to losing some grounds on geographical footprint in investment in Africa. Do you think that a lot of African nations have probably come to a position where they feel like their affiliation with the West over the years have not really translated into improved livelihood, and they want to look somewhere else? That's why a lot of African nations are embracing China in the market. Or what do you think is the driving factor?
I think that's a true statement. America is good at talking. We come out of the summit in December and we talk, oh, we got $50 billion. Oh, we're doing this in Africa. Show me. Where is the investment that you're talking about? And then we over here fighting ourselves. You would think the United States would call the diaspora and say, look, introduce us to Africa. I think I should be one of the wealthiest organizations in Washington, quite frankly. With my networks and my linkages on the continent, I could be helping all kinds of companies to go to Africa if they, if I was asked to do it. But they don't want that kind of, they want you in Africa to deal with them directly and totally leave out the diaspora. I think it's a bad strategy for this country. Now, China's strategy is China came in and said, let's have a different strategy. We're going to actually build that railroad. We're going to actually build the port. We're going to actually build the airport. We're going to actually build the road. And you go across Africa, you see Chinese projects everywhere. Now, we'll go to Africa and complain about China and talk about how China is not your friend. But you go anywhere in Africa, you see the Chinese-built road. You go to Dakar, and you see the airport built by China. The highway you go in is built by China. That railroad going by the road, built by China. That port that you pass, built by China. Where is the American investment that mirror that? If I was an African, I would say, China, welcome.
Yeah,
and
yeah. It's interesting.
Really what
yes, what you said is it's very true. Interesting. I was in Lusaka, Zambia, I believe in 2019, maybe. Right from the airport into town, it was all Chinese billboards written in the Chinese language. Actually, so for a minute I thought I was in some part of China. It's in Africa. That was interesting. Yeah. But on another note, though, when I did a lot of research with the World Bank, and they spilled out some certain country-specific highlights, right, of investment they did. They said they built there was like 1,700 kilometers of fiber optic cable deployed in Mauritania between 21 and 22. So this is just seeing the digital transformation drives that which can drive development in Africa, right? And according to the World Bank, so these are some of the things that within in some of this country, about 4.7 million people in Uganda benefited from a regional program that aimed to lower prices for international capacity and extend the geographical reach of broadband network. Like pretty much everybody has a phone now with the broadband network. And then they say since 2014, they have about 4.3 million people in Malawi have benefited from increased access to affordable, high-quality internet services. Okay, so all these monies are being pumped in. Like another one is $731 million was committed to sub-Saharan African across 11 digital development projects that crossed in the past 6 fiscal years. So all this money that's been pumped into, do you think that the West have to do more than this to get caught up with China, or?
Well, one of the realities of the development. Now, I was also a consultant for the World Bank in 2007, 2009. So I got a chance to get inside the World Bank, and really, when you're at the World Bank, the intellectual discussions are just great. You hear more, but I will say that most of the time when you look at the U.S. contribution, well, I will say we're giving $5 million for a project in Zambia, blah, blah, blah. We'll write it down, put it in the newspaper, and say $5 million. But most of the consultants are from the United States. They get paid their salary in the U.S. bank, and they count that as money that is part of that the money that we committed to the project. You find out that the car that they drive and they brought over from America, they count that against the amount. So by the time you look at how much money out of that $5 million that the Africans actually spent, maybe $50,000.
50,000,
some little small money. We got a driver who, a local Zambian is the driver for the car or something. But the 80%, 90% of the money is actually spent in the United States. It never gets to Africa.
Okay.
But yet you'll hear Biden go up there and say, oh, we're going to do $100 billion in Africa investment. And people like myself who worked and lived in Africa say, okay, how will that show up on the ground in Africa? Now, I think that that's an area that can change.
Yes.
I think that the diaspora ought to be heavily involved in it. I think as the Yali types start to move into responsible positions, they're going to demand this. In other words, if you're saying that you committed $100 million or $500 million to Africa, let me know that $400 million of that was actually spent on the ground in Africa.
Right.
Don't tell me that $400 million is spent in the United States.
Right. So that's very interesting, right? And I have another question because I watched a documentary on Ghana when the first elected president, who you mentioned, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, was the first president. So they built a dam, one of the man-made lakes dams, biggest in the world, for hydroelectric purposes. And the interesting thing in when they were narrating this documentary, it's how they involved the locals, the indigenous people on this project, where they actually perform the land and work alongside different nationalities, but also they were trained in very decision-making positions within the project. We're not talking about just being maybe a flag or something, but you're actually working with the engineer, getting to learn to be a technician, preparing them so that when they commission the dam and hand over, the natives were capable of running this plant and compensated. So the government had the will of the people or the interest of people at heart. You don't see that in the modern era right now. Is it not interesting? Do you think that's where we need to go back to?
Well, there's a book by a guy named John Perkins called The Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And they were written about 30 years ago. It's a must-read for anybody who's concerned about development, because he explains a lot of this. He was working for the World Bank and these entities. My job was to get the Africans indebted, get them to owe us money. So at the end of the project, the Africans owe us money that they can never pay off. And you're supposed to commit so many billions of dollars to help Africa. But Africa ends up owing you money. How could that be? We got a lot of work to be done. The world does not negotiate with Africa the way it should. And it's not just the United States, it's all of these countries, all of the European countries, especially France and Britain. They're specialists in making you dependent on me. So you have to bow down to me when I come. And they want you to stay in that position. The last thing they want you to do is to be empowered, to take that hydroelectric power and start selling it to other countries and becoming very wealthy and build schools and build hospitals and build your own roads. That's the last thing they want to happen. They want you to be dependent on them. Sure, they'll make you, Mr. President, look good. We give you a brand new limousine even. You can drive around in your limousine and wear nice suits. But we want you to be indebted to the West. We want you to be indebted to the West. And we want to make sure that future generations remain indebted so that we could come in and really negotiate your mineral resources for our benefit.
That's it. I sure do know that Africa right now has a lot of resources, the knowledge. A lot of people have gone studied outside, have worked outside. They have the knowledge to build their own things. It's just a challenge on how things have not been put together where these things are happening. I guess maybe do you think they need more initiatives that will encourage people to come back and create a work environment where people feel comfortable to get back to work in Africa?
I think one of the problems is the Africans who come to the United States for education and training, for the most part, they put them out in Nebraska and Texas and way out away from Black people here. They train them up in Oklahoma and places like that. Then they bring them to Washington to work in the State Department, AID. They work in various think tanks, Brookings and so forth. But they don't have any relationship with people like me. I can say all of the Africans who work in the Biden administration, there's many of them. I know them all. If they see me at a reception or at a meeting, sure, they shake hands. But they never will call you up and say, oh, can we have a sit down and talk about strategy? Never. Right. Because they've been trained up. They send them to white churches. In some cases, they give them a spouse. But they make sure that these Africans see America from their lens and not from our lens. They're not well informed about what goes on with Black people in this country. So a big part of the problem is that. Now, I do think that a lot of the immigrants, like if you look around the United States, you'll find that the top doctors in the United States are from Cameroon or from Nigeria. I mean, you go to Harvard, you go to Yale, you go to the highest, you'll see a Cameroonian, John and Kingasang, who's head of PEPFAR. He's Cameroonian, He's a Cameroonian. Now, why is it that Africa got all of these health problems on the ground in Africa when the people here who are saving the lives of the Mzungu, of the white people, are Africans? Why aren't these Africans able to apply their talent and skills back home? Especially with technology being what it is, telemedicine and so forth. Yes. We should have a lot more African direct cooperation on the continent, but we don't have it. I think part of that is intentional. You'll find that some of these American universities who work in Africa, they want to make sure that you're dealing with white people. You're not dealing with even your own African immigrant. It's a multifaceted problem that we got to deal with. But part of this, it goes back to what I said, the unity of African people is the key thing. Yeah.
And then also part of that, we get African people have to take ownership and try to build their own stuff. So a couple of questions before we wrap it up. So I know you've won many awards and accolades throughout your 40 years plus spans of this thing, such as the Knight of the National Order, which was issued to you by the government of Mali, and I think a similar one the government of Senegal also did. You were also features on 500 most influential Africans in the world by Tropic magazine. So, and also another one, you were honored by the Black Caucus in Washington, D.C., by the ECOWAS Ambassador Corps in the USA, and so many other accomplishments. So out of all these awards, which one do you hold close to heart and why?
Ah, gosh, that's a hard question. Ali Award, because it came after the coup d'etat. I thought it was not going to happen. I was told by the former Mali ambassador it was going to happen. Everything was put in place. Then they had the coup d'etat. And a year passed. I didn't think it was going to happen. But then I get a call and say, hey, we're going to honor this. We're going to honor this. And it was during the time of COVID. It was in 2021. And it was a simple ceremony. One of the officials flew in from Bamako, and they pin you and do all the things they do, the recognition. But to me, it means a lot. And I can say that since I've gotten the award, I've been very close to Mali. I've been to Mali 3 times since the award. And yesterday, in fact, I had lunch with the Mali ambassador to Washington, and also the U.S. ambassador to Mali was in town. So I had lunch. I was lunch with a delegation of Mali entrepreneurs who was here. We had a lunch yesterday with them. And so for me, I feel very much at home with Malian people. When I was there, Salif Keita, who is the top musician, heard I was there. I was there in November for a trade mission, and he made his way to the hotel and waited for us to come back. We were on a field mission, and so I get out of the car, and he runs over to me and hugs me. Wow. He's the top musician in Mali.
Yes.
And it was almost mind-boggling. And he only could stay for a few minutes because all these people started gathering because they wanted to see Kiti. They wanted to see the musician, and he only could stay like 10 minutes. So he shook my hand and said, "I heard you were in town, and I heard about the constituency for Africa. I just want to thank you."
Thank you.
And, it was only from the heart,
Yes.
So if I had to pick one, that would be the one that really sticks in my mind.
Yes. So what's next for you on this journey, and also what uplifting messages would you like to share with our audience today?
Well, I'm getting of age. It's time for me to retire. And whenever I talk about retirement, I get all kinds of people. Oh no, you can never retire. What am I supposed to do? Be 100 years? You want me to be like an African leader? They want me to be like Paul Biya or something. President for life. Be 100 years old. No, no. So I got to retire, and I'm looking at this year. I'm looking at the end of the year. I'm already talking to some young people about taking over. We had a lunch, a dinner last week, and we're going to have further conversation. I think they're the right ones to take over.
Nice.
And so I want to write my book, and the name of the book is "Opening Doors to Africa," and it's my memoir over my 50 years working on Africa. I think the next generation deserves this book. Lessons learned, things that I learned, things I would do differently, strategy for the next generation to move forward. I didn't have anybody to tell me, to guide me like that. But I think if I was a young person who started my career and I want to do something to help Africa, there's millions of Africans who feel that way. It'd be good to have a guidebook and say, okay, this guy has been working on Africa all these years. How did he do what he's doing? And a big part of my success has been I've been able to focus. You won't find that a lot of people, they have a disappointment. Something happened in the job, they quit the job or they get fired. Then they go do something totally different. They go chasing something totally different. But in my case, I stayed focused on Africa consistently for 50 years. And so why do I have access like I do? Because I've been here through all of these administrations. Why do I know how to deal with these different ambassadors? Because I've been to all of their countries. I've been there. And I've been involved on every major African issue really for the last several decades, be it AGOA trade, be it HIV/AIDS, be it PEPFAR, be it COVID. I've been involved in all of the issues that affect Africa, the U.S.-Africa relations over this period of time. And so I've been able to get a lot further because I've been able to focus. And one of my messages to the next generation, find out what your mission in life is. Find it out early. Find it out early. Find out what it is you really want your life. What do you want to have on your tombstone when you die? Say he cared about Africa. Anything else? And so if you can figure that out early in life and stay focused on it, a lot of good things can happen. But it's very easy. The temptations are always to jump around, try this, go there. And life is really relatively short. You think you got a long time, but you don't. You look up and you say, wow, and now I'm in my 70s. Wow, how could that happen? And so I tell my daughter, I tell others, the focus on, find out what your life mission is, and then you focus on it like it's a laser beam, and do it for 50 years, and you will have a lot of success.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm sure looking forward to be one of the first readers on your book once it comes out. So, Mr. Foote, I would like to thank you so much for making time. I know you are a very busy man, and we've been trying to coordinate this, but I really do appreciate the depth knowledge that you have, and then taking the time and also unselfishly sharing all the great and inspiring stories and accomplishments in your life. I believe it will go a long way to uplift people's continents. As the saying goes, the continents of one man brighteneth another, iron sharpen irons. I hope to bring you back again because we've just scratched the surface of what you have to offer here. And hopefully next time when I'll bring you here, your book will be out and we can have a discussion on your book as well. And then I'm also looking forward to the connection with Dr. Julius Garvey, who I think also has a lot to contribute to this platform.
Well, I will say, right, man, send me an email and make it a request, and then I will forward to him and put you in touch with him. And I'm sure he'll do it. He'd be happy to do it.
Yes.
But I'm happy to be here, too. I didn't know, really, I get a lot of requests every day I get, especially young people. Young people they think that you have the answer to all of their problems. You can get them a job, you can get them investment, you can do everything. And so you constantly get bombarded with young people wanting you only got 24 hours in the day. So I try to counsel the young people and say, look, if you get access to a person of influence, don't waste any of their time. Know what you want. I get young people send me a text and they say, hello. That's the text. And I'm supposed to go back, oh, hello. How are you? Well, by the time you even ask your question, 10 minutes done passed. Right. Don't do that. But a lot of them are kids. They don't know how to do it. So I try to be patient as I can. I try to help as much as I can. But you only can do so much. And so as you get older, you got a limited time to do these kinds of things. So you want to make sure that when you do them, that they somehow are meaningful. And so once you decide to produce this, let me have it, and I'll share it in my network also.
Yes, I would do exactly so, say. So to all our listeners, a big thank you for staying tuned with us. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Uplift Chronicles.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Uplift Chronicles. I hope you found inspiration in today's stories and the spirit of upliftment. Remember, every life has the power to inspire change, and every story is a thread in the rich tapestry of our shared heritage. If you enjoyed this episode, kindly subscribe and leave a review, and share it with someone who could use a little upliftment in their life. Follow us on social media for more updates and join the conversation. Until next time, keep uplifting and stay inspired. Signing off, this is Kofi Dake.